Testing one, one, one.
الو تيست تيست
لا، حسين بيستقبله. حسين بدك تستقبل الوزير بعد ما اجى؟
يلا
بعد ما اجى. هيك هي هيدا ايه اوكي ايه عدي محلك. صباح الخير، اهلا وسهلا فيكم. معالي الوزير العمل الاستاذ كميل ابو سليمان، حضرة رئيس الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت الدكتور فضل خوري، حضرة رئيس اتحاد العمال العام الأستاذ طلال فقيه، ممثلو الوزارات، ممثلو المؤسسات العسكرية وممثلو المنظمات الدولية. نفتتح الحفل بالنشيد الوطني اللبناني والجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. هي أستاذة في الصحة البيئية والصحة والسلامة المهنية، رئيسة دائرة صحة البيئة في كلية العلوم الصحية في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. شغلت منصب رئيسة اللجنة الفنية المعنية بعمل الفئات الاجتماعية في الرابطة الدولية لبيئة العمل. هي عضو مؤسس في شبكة الزراعة والبيئة والصحة الإقليمية التي أطلقتها من كلية العلوم الصحية في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. نالت جائزة قسم الصحة والسلامة المهنية للجمعية الأمريكية للصحة العامة عن عملها في توثيق ظروف المعيشة والأعمال الخطرة للاجئين المهمشين، وتقديراً لإنجازاتها ومساهماتها في مجال الصحة المهنية والبيئية تم انتخابها عضواً في أكاديمية كوليكيوم رمزيني. قادت أبحاثاً عدة تمحورت على مبادئ العدالة الاجتماعية والبيئية في عدة مواضيع تتعلق بالصحة والمخاطر في بيئة العمل وصحة المهاجرين والنازحين والمجتمعات الريفية الفقيرة. وقد ساهم بحثها الأكاديمي في تسليط الضوء على عمل المهمشين ودعمهم، وخاصة الأطفال العاملين النازحين السوريين، كما كانت المشرفة الأولى لإعداد مسح حول عمل الأطفال النازحين السوريين في القطاع الزراعي في سهل البقاع في لبنان هو موضوع اليوم، بمساعدة تقنية ومادية من منظمات الأمم المتحدة والجمعيات الأهلية المعنية بملف عمل الأطفال، وبدعم رسمي من وزارة العمل، والتي ستقوم بعرضها الدكتورة ريما حبيب. تفضلي، المنبر لك.
هولي بنقدر نزيحهم شوي معلش؟ ايه هيك الصوت بيبقى بس مشان لحط اغراضي. علي ماشي حال الصوت؟ ثانك يو. طيب اهلا وسهلا فيكم بالجامعه الامريكيه. أنا بدي رحب بالجميع، معالي الوزير، all the dignitaries. أنا محضرة التوك تبعي بالإنجليزي لأنه مشان لرحب بالناس يلي ما بيقدروا يحكوا عربي منيح، بس في simultaneous translation. يلي بعد ما عنده السبيكرز بليز تفضلوا وخذوا مايا بتقدر توزع لكم. أنا مش رح ضيف على الترحيبات يلي قالتهم مدام نزهة شليطة بروتوكوليا، بس بدي رحب بالجميع الموجودين معنا بالقاعة، وبالأخص بمعالي الوزير يلي شرفنا بحضوره اليوم. بيعني لنا كثير يكون موجود معنا. للحقيقة أنا رح مشان ما أخذ وقت أكثر ولأنه في simultaneous translation, I'll follow the notes that I have written and I shared with the translator ahead of time. And this event is going to be live streamed on the AUB website. So for those who haven't grabbed some headphones for the translation, please do so, because some talks are going to be in English and some of them are going to be in Arabic. I'll present the findings of the study, and after giving a background to the study, and then just rest assured that all the results that I will be presenting on my PowerPoint are in the report. And maybe you have also grabbed a report already at the door. I will be taking exactly the time that was allowed for my talk as per the agenda. So I apologize if people think that it's a little bit lengthy. We're good on technology at AUB. It's just me. I suffer a little bit to grasp the right thing to do with technology. Child labor is defined by the International Labour Organization as work that is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children and their work, and work that interferes with their schooling. The fragile situations during wars and forced displacement are characterized by economic shocks, breakdown in formal and social support networks, disruption in basic services, and foremost, poverty. These conditions push children into child labor as a coping mechanism. Armed conflicts have hit many countries around the world recently, as shown on this map, where the darker colors on the map depict higher number of deaths. The darker color on the graph. Millions of people have been displaced as a result of armed conflict. In 2015, Syria has topped other countries in the number of refugees with about 11.6 million displaced Syrians. Between 2012 and 2015, the number of UNHCR registered Syrian refugees in Lebanon rose exponentially, or should I say the displaced, but this is how they are referred to in the UN reports. This number rose from just over 9,000 to over 1 million. Currently, Lebanon has the highest number of refugees per capita in the world. According to the UNHCR, the Bekaa Valley is the area which hosts the highest concentration of Syrian refugees in the country. This is around 35% of the total number of the displaced Syrians in Lebanon. It is mainly because of the availability of work in agriculture and the proximity to Syria, that it shares a borderline with Syria. Like in many other countries, agricultural work in Lebanon has been dependent on the work of migrant workers and currently on the labor of the displaced Syrians. According to the UN report on vulnerability assessment of Syrian refugees in Lebanon, the Wazir, around 240,000 Syrian refugees in Lebanon work in the agricultural sector. Among those, 22% are males, 55% are females, and 22% are children. Informal tented settlements occupied by the displaced Syrians are common in the Bekaa Valley. They are predominantly crowded and in very poor conditions. The transient poverty in informal tented settlements, which I will refer to as ITSs from now on, drives family to use several coping strategies, which can include engaging their children in income-generating activities. Prior reports have suggested that the prevalence of child labor among Syrian refugees in Lebanon may be at its highest in the Bekaa Valley, mostly in agriculture, an occupation that may pose many hazards to the health and well-being of working children. Based on this situation, the Faculty of Health Sciences received an official letter from the Ministry of Labor in January 2016 requesting to undertake a research study on child labor in agriculture among displaced Syrian children in Bekaa. Given the history between the Ministry of Labor and the Faculty of Health Sciences, the Child Labor Unit, backed by the International Labor Organization, insisted that the Faculty of Health Sciences at AUB and no one else undertake the study. Later on, the ILO office, and specifically Dr. Hayata Sayran of the ILO, engaged two other UN agencies, namely FAO and UNICEF, due to their concern with child labor in agriculture. The Faculty of Health Sciences' solid partnership with the Ministry of Labor, and specifically the child labor at the Ministry of Labor, dates back to many years. The previous work of the FHS Dean, Iman Wahid, with the ministry led to Decree 8987, targeting the worst form of child labor, as well as a training guide to accompany this critical decree. In the letter from the Ministry of Labor, the Faculty of Health Sciences was to undertake the study and hand in a report to the ministry. Your Excellency, the Minister of Labor, this report is now in your hands. And I want to acknowledge the many contributors to this study who have supported me days and nights, tirelessly, stood by my side to complete this study. Their names are listed on the contributors list in the report. I'll give you a second to gaze at them. They're very important people to me. And some of them are here in the audience. Dr. Khalil Al-Asmar, Ms. Micheline, and who else is there? Okay. Some of them are not here. Just Micheline Ziadi is here because of travel. So apologies for their absence. The study objectives were, as you can see on this slide, and considering my background in occupational health and my interest in the health of workers, I undertook the study with the following aim: to document the working and living conditions of Syrian refugee child laborer living in informal tented settlements in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, the social capital of the working children and their families, the influence of child labor on educational attainment and well-being. The study objectives were guided by a theoretical framework developed by Jonathan Bradshaw, an academic figure in the field of social policy. Given the interconnected social, economic, and political systems impacting Syrian displaced child laborers, this study adopted a multidimensional approach that seeks to understand the phenomenon of child labor on multiple levels: the occupational setting, the familial experience, and the community context. They go hand in hand. They all have impacts. We cannot ignore one at the expense of another. On this slide, we see the study timeline and the chronological sequence of milestones. In fact, preparations for the study started before we received the official letter from the Ministry of Labor, as we were in discussion with the Child Labor Unit, and particularly Ms. Nazha Shallita and the ILO, and particularly Ms. Hayat Asayran, Dr. Hayat Asayran, since October 2015. Despite the urgent need for information from the study, it progressed slowly due to lengthy and thorough internal review of the research protocol at AUB that took into account the vulnerability of the study population. They are children, they are displaced, and they are laborers. So this multiple vulnerability had to be reviewed very carefully, and lawyers had to step in to check what needs to be done and what kind of protocol should be followed to ensure that no harm is incurred to these children. Further delays were incurred due to a shortage of funding, and the researchers having to solicit funds from other sources to complete the study. However, this was a positive omen, I would say, because it allowed to expand the research scope much wider than initially anticipated during our talks with the UN agencies that funded the study. In these discussions, we were anticipated with the UN agencies, we were anticipated to carry out a study targeting between 300 to 500 children working in agriculture. By soliciting more funds from IDRC, the International Development Research Center, we ended up having one of the largest studies to be carried out on child labor globally, if not the largest. In addition, the project was further delayed by the intermittent military activities in Bekaa, as you know what happened. So I'll just take you back in time. In reality, the most challenging aspect of the research was the armed conflict in the study area during the data collection phase. The Operation Fajr al-Jurud, in which the Lebanese army launched an attack on ISIS on the outskirts of Arsal, coincided with our data collection phase in August 2017. The Lebanese Daily Star newspaper clipping on this slide shows the areas affected by the armed conflict where data collection had to be postponed. Following the armed operations, we secured permission from the director of the Lebanese General Security, Liwa Abbas Ibrahim, and the commander of the Lebanese Army Forces in Bekaa, Ali Awarki, to access highly secured areas, and data collection resumed once it was deemed safe to do so. For our own safety, they told us not to proceed at that time. Many challenges were faced during the study. The researchers' safety was one of them. We needed a clearance from the army for our own safety, and we had to cross checkpoints. We also had to hold the data collection on days that were not declared safe. However, there is a positive aspect in any hardship. Always you have to look at the glass half full. Although the fights in Syria and Bekaa took a nasty sectarian character, the sectarian tensions did not stop data collectors from Baalbek and El Hermel to work in Arsal camp that housed displaced Syrians from Qusayr, Syria. And you know that these people were fighting with each other at the time. It was a pleasure to witness that the sectarian tensions were diffused after initial interactions. I was there and saw it. The Baalbek al-Hermel research team found the refugees gracious, or the displaced, I should say, gracious and inviting, and vice versa. And we all became friends. The target population in the study consisted of Syrian displaced working children residing in informal tented settlements in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. I will use, as I told you before, I will use the acronym ITSs to refer to informal tented settlements. We used the interagency mapping platform to develop the sampling frame. This platform, or database, is used to coordinate human activities in Lebanon. It contains information on all ITSs and their residents in the country. The database provided us with a list of ITSs and their location in Hermel, Baalbek, Zahli, and West Bekaa. We calculated a sample size of 1,884 households based on a 17% estimate prevalence of child labor in the agricultural sector in Bekaa. And we randomly selected 153 ITSs, informal tented settlements, and identified households with working children between the ages of 4 and 18. The sampled areas were distributed across the districts of Baalbek, Hermel, Zahli, and West Bekaa, as depicted by the dots on this map. Yeah, we can correct me. We developed 2 questionnaires for the survey, a structured household questionnaire and a child questionnaire. The child questionnaires were developed for 2 age groups, those between 8 and 18, with whom we carried out a face-to-face interview following consent of the guardian, and the assent of the children according to IRB protocol at AUB. That's why the study is very large and rare, because we had to get the consent and assent, the consent of the guardian, the assent of the child between 8 and 18. As for those aged between 4 and 8 years, we did not interview them, of course. Instead, we carried out interviews with an adult guardian in the household. We used electronic tablets for data collection. Intensive training was done for all the data collectors. Beyond, a Lebanese NGO assisted in the recruitment of the data collectors in the first phase of the study. More data collectors were separately recruited and trained for data collection in Arsal and Qa districts. Training on fieldwork activities took place in various locations and in several phases at AUB before the beginning of data collection and later in the field. We had a graduation day following the training workshops on fieldwork activities. I'm showing these pictures to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of data collectors who worked in challenging weather and field conditions to collect the data. So acknowledgement to them. All trainees received a certificate of attendance following an exam, which they took at the Faculty of Health Sciences following the training at AUB. We hired a quality control team, including a field coordinator and 7 quality control staff. Members of the quality control team revisited all the households of the sample for cross-checks to ensure data quality. Yes, all of them, 100% quality control. 100% quality control is unusual in such surveys, but the challenges that we faced in undertaking the study required such measures. For instance, reaching the working children was a very big challenge considering their unpredictable work schedule. They are working children, they are child laborers. Now I will present to you the key findings of the survey, starting with information on households. The total surveyed population consisted of 12,708 individuals residing in 1,902 households. 47% were male and 52% were female of all age groups. As shown in the upper graph, 37% of the households were comprised of 7 to 9 members. However, on average, the households were comprised of 6 to 7 members. The lower graphs shows that 65% of the study population was under 18 years of age, for a total number of 8,285 children. This shows that the population in the selected camps is young. The results showed on this graph, showing the household expenditures, it shows that the expenditures outweighed or outpaced the income. The average monthly income per capita was reported to be $50, whereas the average monthly expenditure per capita was $119, leading to an income expenditure gap of $69 per month. As you can see on the pie charts, here on the graph, showing on the graph now, households spent the largest part or the larger part of their income on food, 41%, on debt, 15%, and on health services, 8%. When stratifying by districts, the household expenditures spent on food was similar in all districts. The food expenditures ranged from 37% to 43% across districts. The same applied to repayment of debt, which ranged from 14 to 17% across districts. The findings revealed that households experienced severe financial insecurity. Now the findings on the working children. Yes, they are as young as that, and they start work at a very young age. We took these pictures, so we know the realities. We collected data on 4,090 children between 8 and 18 years through face-to-face interviews, and on 287 children between 4 and 8 years from a proxy respondent. 48% of the working children were female, and 52% were male, as depicted on these graphs. As for the distribution of working children by age and gender, 34% of the working children were between 8 and 12 years, and more boys started working at an earlier age, as you can see. Now I will underline some key findings on the working children. On average, children started working when they were 10.9 years or 11 years old, which was true to both males and females. This is an early start considering the hazardous work that is involved in agriculture. You know, exposure to pesticides, heavy lifting, unsafe ergonomic exposures, and even snake bites. So it's highly renowned for being hazardous, the work in agriculture. The average age of working children in the sample was 12.9 years. This was younger than documented in previous studies. For instance, a survey of Syrian children in Turkey found that the average age of child laborers was between 14 and 15 years, and not 12.9 years, as we have seen here. 75% of the working children were employed in the agricultural sector, with more females at 85% than males at 66%. Those children are prone to the hazardous exposures encountered in the agricultural work. Further, 30% of the working children in the study had experienced a workplace injury. 30% workplace injury, 30%. The prevalence of workplace injury was higher among males at 34% than among females at 26%. Maybe because they undertake different tasks during the field work. Nearly 34% of the children used a sharp or heavy object at work. This was highest in children between 12 and 15 years, as showing in this graph. Thank you for relieving me. So I can push it a little bit, يزيح شوي. A considerable proportion of the working children have been abused at work. Boys and girls reported being threatened and being hit. More boys than girls have been hit at 20% compared to 12%, and 11% of boys were hit hard. Also, nearly 38% of the children were not paid on time. Some kind of slavery. This is a picture of a girl stitching tobacco leaves in a Bekaa camp. Look at the sharp object between her fingers that she is using to stitch the leaves. So, see the sharp object? As for the results on school enrollment, only 18% of the working children were enrolled in school in 2017. These are the findings of our sampled population. The percentage of males attending school was about 20% higher than that of females, which was around 17%. For the working children in compulsory school age, between 6 and 15 years, 23% were attending school with a higher percentage of males at 24% than females at 22%. As for working children in the non-compulsory school age between 15 and 18 years, 5% were attending school with no difference across genders. It is 5% for both males and females. For children who did not attend school, 50%, 55.5%, reported they did not because of work commitments. Children who had both seasonal and year-round work were the least likely to be attending school. 82% of the working children reported working under the sun for long hours, for an average of 6 hours a day. 30% said that they worked in the cold for an average of 5.8 hours per day. And 11% said they worked in the rain. The figures are here, you can see them. When asked about the cost of treatment of injury when it occurs at work, listen to this. 86% of the children reported that it was covered by their parents, or their relatives, or the children themselves, while 14% only said that it was covered by their employers. In summary, displaced Syrian children have had to work in poor conditions to ensure their families' survival. This is the result of trenchant poverty and humanitarian aid falling short of addressing their needs. Children, some as young as 4, are compelled to work, and many forego educational opportunities in favor of work. Child labor has been a coping strategy for the displaced Syrians living in informal tented settlements in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. Look again at this little girl, not even 4 years of age, stitching tobacco leaves as part of the work activities of her family. Although her face is partly covered to hide her identity, we covered it, the sadness in her eyes cannot be hidden. She does not have toys like other children and may not be going to school like others. Her childhood is disrupted. Despite this bleak situation, the children's optimism was not affected, and 91% in our survey said they still believe they will have a better future. As my presentation comes to a close, I want to share some final suggestions that may help us in confronting child labor in Lebanon. First, stakeholders should have a roundtable to discuss policies impacting child labor. Second, we should find ways to start eliminating child labor. I believe this can be accompanied simultaneously with the promotion of universal education as well as other measures. Third, we should train children of legal age for work on basic occupational health and safety principles so we protect them from danger. Finally, stakeholders can work together to improve the health infrastructure that responds to occupational injuries and illnesses impacting children and adult workers. No child should pay for the treatment of his or her own injury at work. These 4 areas require our commitment and the urgent mobilization of energy and resources. I'm personally committed to this cause, and hope that others will join me in the work of confronting child labor in your country. This is my word, Your Excellency. I am committed. I provide my services to you. Finally, I will show you a very short documentary that was produced by World Vision describing the work day of a child in agriculture. Can we play the video, Ali, please?
حزار جوا
أمي بتكون تقول ليش تلعبي صرتي كبيرة، لازم تروحي على الشغل عشان نعيش عشان ناكل، والمعلم يضربني واللي اشتغلي الوكيل واللي ما بنظف وراي بيضربني كمان، لأني ما بحب الشغل، رجلي فاتت بجزازة ما فيني امشي عليها. لا ما بحب الشغل، لما بشتغل بضل 5-6 ساعات يعني ظهري يقوم يوجعني، يعني لأن المعلم ما بيخلينا نرتاح، بده يخلص أرضه. يعني مشان نعيش، يعني مشان نجيب حق ربطة خبز، لما نشتغل مليانة يعني انكسر ظهري. بس مشان لاكل، عبلي اشتغل مشان لاكل، مشان الطعام، بلا تعب، هسه ظهري لما انا بالوقت طيب يوجعني ظهري، يضل عشب ورانا بيعيط علينا المعلم، واحيانا بيضربنا. لا ما بحب شغلي يانسة، لأنه بتعب يانسة، بصير صفحتي توجعني، اشتغل يانسة بدنا نعيش يانسة، غصبا عنا بدنا نشتغل. الشغل بيساعدنا واللعب بيفرحنا.
ايه اكيد انا بحب العب.
ايه بحب العب يانسة.
Finally, I thank the displaced Syrians in the Bekaa who received us in their homes and agreed to participate in the study. I also thank the data collectors team from Beyond and the team who worked in Qaa and in Arsal, the Ministry of Labor staff, and especially the director of the Child Labor Unit, Ms. Nazha Shallita, for identifying the need for this study, and the ILO, UNICEF, and FAO for participating as well. I want to underline how grateful I am to the International Development Research Center, IDRC Canada, for their support to the Faculty of Health Sciences at AUB, which has made this research possible. Also, I would like, finally, to show you some pictures of the best field coordinator that I have ever met, Ms. Rosine, who won an award according to me. And the data collection, the people who have helped me throughout this project, they have been referred to as the nerds because we were working night and days. The team, some of them are here. The training at AUB, the fieldwork in Arsal, the children and the fieldwork in Arsal, and thank you very much for listening.
شكراً دكتورة ريما حبيب على هذا العرض القيم وعلى هذا الفيديو المؤثر جداً الذي يعكس حالة هؤلاء الأطفال العاملين والذين يتعرضون للاستغلال في سوق العمل وخاصة في القطاع الزراعي. هو طالب سابق في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. نشأ في عائلة احتضنتها الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت من أب كان عميداً لكلية الطب وأم أستاذة لعلم الرياضيات فيها. هو خريج جامعتي ييل وكولومبيا وكان بروفيسوراً وأستاذ كرسي روبرتو جيم غوازويتا في دائرة أمراض الدم والأورام في كلية إيموري للطب. كما كان العميد التنفيذي المشارك للبحوث ونائب مدير معهد وينشيب للسرطان في الكلية. هو عضو منتخب في الجمعية الأمريكية للاستقصاءات السريرية وزميل في المعهد الأمريكي للأطباء وزميل في الجمعية الأمريكية لتقدم العلوم وعضو في الأكاديمية اللبنانية للعلوم. أصبح الرئيس السادس عشر للجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت الAUB في أول أيلول عام 2015 وهو أول لبناني أمريكي يتولى هذا المنصب من خلال علاقاته الشخصية القوية والعميقة مع لبنان والجامعة. أولوياته كانت القيام بحملة جمع التبرعات التي أطلقتها الجامعة لتعزيز بعثاتها البحثية والتعليمية وتطوير الحرم الجامعي والمرافق الطبية المتطورة. تحت قيادته أعاد الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت للعمل بالإدارة الأكاديمية وإقامة شراكات مع جامعات نظيرة في لبنان ومختلف دول العالم. كما يقود حالياً رؤية 2030 هي خطة بعيدة المدى لجعل الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت جامعة تحددها أكثر قوة روح الأداب في التعليم والتميز في الأبحاث والرعاية الطبية والتزام ثابت بلبنان والعالم العربي. حصل على جائزة ريتشارد وهندا روزنتل من الجمعية الأمريكية لأبحاث السرطان لعمله المرجعي في سرطان الرئة والجهاز الهضمي التنفسي. حضرة الرئيس الدكتور فضل خوري، معكم ننجز وبتعاونكم يستمر العطاء. الكلمة لك.
I'm going to speak in English. Good morning, Your Excellency, my friend, the Minister of Labor, Camille Abu Sulaiman, honored guests, colleagues, and friends. It's an honor to have you here at AUB to work together on the launching of this very significant and potentially decisive report. This is the largest and most exacting report on child labor in the Middle East that's ever been produced. I think you saw that the main conclusions, as just presented by Dr. Habib, are devastating. Out of over 4,300 children interviewed, more than half are not going to school because they need to work, and 30% have been injured on the job. More than 11% have been beaten badly. Children as young as 4 years old are being put to work, toiling in the heat and in the cold. These are young people who are being deprived of their childhood and are sacrificing their future in order to support themselves and their families. This is entirely unacceptable, and I can relate, coming off script, that one of the first things I did when I went to Washington, D.C., was to go to the State Department and request for additional funding for education and other programs. And the first time we did this, we were disappointed to hear that several $billions were being spent to put roofs over the heads of these young folks and food in their mouths. We pointed out that what they really needed was hope and the opportunity to learn. And I think all three are interrelated. I'm happy to say that we finally were able to secure about $8 million through lobbying from Congress for projects, pilot projects for the schooling of Syrian children. In his foreword to a UN report on the state of the world's children in 2000, former Secretary General Kofi Annan said, "There is no trust more sacred than the one the world holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected, that their welfare is protected, that their lives are free from fear and want, and that they grow up in peace." And you could see the fear and the want and the pain in all of the children in this video. At AUB, we've always aspired to create a more equitable world, serving as a creator for opportunities and an advocate for those less fortunate. At a time like this, when Lebanon hosts more refugees per capita than any other country, the role that AUB plays is more important than ever, particularly when the fate of these children has become something of a political football. Luckily, we're not alone in our commitment to addressing the most urgent problems faced by this extremely disadvantaged and marginalized group. The Ministry of Labor, to its credit, the Ministry of Labor saw in 2015, and I applaud you, Your Excellency, and Doctora, this is very important work, to have a study that gives us the details and the facts on refugee child labor, and you knew, and you actually insisted, that only AUB's Faculty of Health Sciences had the capacity and the ability to conduct this study. Our partners at the International Labor Organization, with their century-long commitment to fighting child labor, have helped fund the study and brought in UNICEF and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. Now, because of the extreme vulnerability of these individuals, I've been informed by the Dean that this took almost 17 months to get all the approvals, 20 months. Additional substantial funding has also come from our good friends at Canada's International Development Research Centre, the IDRC. This funding allowed us to expand the scope of the study and to conduct it with the necessary standards of accuracy and what you saw from Dr. Habib, 100% quality control, resulting in the high impact data that we're proud to launch today. So our sincere thanks to all of you, particularly to Dr. Habib for leading this difficult study. Confronting the global problem of child labor requires a concerted effort from many sectors that don't always work easily together, and much of the work has to be done, as you saw, at the local level. This can include direct aid as well as government policies coupled with vigorous enforcement. As an institution of higher education, the oldest one in the region, AUB can do none of these things without your support. But we can still do a great deal to make sure that the work gets done. Most importantly, as we've done serially, we can inform policy and practice by producing research that can provide the basis for intelligent government policy and decision-making and interventions that are implementable and sustainable. We believe that solid, action-oriented research is the best way to reveal the truth of what these working children are undergoing and ultimately to work to alleviate their suffering. We also believe strongly in supporting our local institutions. This study builds a long and solid partnership with the Ministry of Labor, and especially the Child Labor Unit, and Occupational Health section of the ministry, which previously worked with our FHS Dean Iman Nwayhid ever since early in his career, and ultimately leading to Decree 8987, which targeted the very worst forms of child labor, those that produced long-term neurological damage. I want to thank Minister Abu Sulaiman for joining us today, for his great seriousness in his efforts in the short time since he started the job. I'd like to thank the ILO, UNICEF, and FAO for your support, and to the IDRC for understanding the importance of this study and for being a longtime partner and a funder of research at FHS. Finally, I'd like to again thank Rima Habib and her team for the exceptional work they did on this critical report. They are worthy of our respect and support, and for so much more. All of us here today have one common objective: to eradicate child labor so that every child has an opportunity to have a healthy upbringing and a proper education, and ideally one day so they can be an AUB student. But to get there, they need time for recreation, time for play, time for life. AUB and FHS are committed to continue this collaboration to improve the lives of all working children living on Lebanese soil. Our hands are always stretched out to work with partners. In the last 5 days alone, I've met with the President of the Republic and 2 other ministers in addition to Camille. My sense is there is a seriousness about treating these really vulnerable individuals, whether in education, in health, or in labor, with the compassion they deserve. I don't think any one of us can solve this, but I believe working together, we can really help these young people reclaim their childhood and ensure they do not become a lost generation. There are tremendous studies of childhood plasticity that show that children at this age can recover from insult and injury. In fact, some studies suggest that some of the greatest minds of our century have suffered severe childhood trauma. But let's not test that hypothesis and put them all through trauma. Let's work together to make sure that they have better lives. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتور فضل خوري على كلمتك الرائعة، ونعهدك أننا سنكون على أتم التعاون مع الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت، كونها أصبحت الشريكة الأساسية مع وزارة العمل ومع كل الأفرقاء في لبنان بالقضاء على مكافحة عمل الأطفال. شكرا لك. يجدر الإشارة هنا أن هناك كلمة لمركز بحوث التنمية الدولية، لقد اعتذروا عن الحضور لأسباب طارئة. أما بعد، العطاء سلوك حضاري، وهو من أبرز السمات التي تقاس بها الإنسانية المجتمع. هذا ما يميزها، كما إن حقوق الإنسان جزء أساسي من مبادئها وعلى جميع المستويات، من أجل تجنب أبشع الجرائم التي ترتكب بحق الأطفال، ولا سيما أسوأ أشكال عمل الأطفال. مبادرتها لا لضياع الجيل، أولوياتها توفير التعليم الجيد والصحة والأمن لجميع الأطفال المهمشين، دعم التعليم الرسمي للنازحين السوريين في لبنان. هذه السمات تجسدها ممثلة منظمة الأمم المتحدة السيدة فيولا في لبنان. سوري ما اجت. اعتذرت عن الحضور، هلا اخر تكه عم بيبلغوني. اوكي. السيدة فيولا، بدعمكم تهنأ الأطفال، وبالشراكة معنا تتحقق مبادرتكم. الكلمة لك.
So good morning, everybody, on this very occasion that we're all here on a report that has been on our beamers for many, many years, and with an issue that's been very long-standing on all of our advisors and vision. So, Your Excellency, thank you very much for being here and indeed for initiating the study and for moving it to this level. For the President of AUB, Mr. Curry, for standing here and being very articulate and moving this agenda forward. Thank you very much on that. And the colleagues from IDRC, from FAO, and everybody else that's here and has such keen interest in us. And I think I would like to also just, yes, I see you now finally sitting there, Beyond, say something about Beyond and Vision, World Vision, who are the actors on the ground who are working on these issues every single day on this. So actually this year is the year of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's 30 years since we signed as countries the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is a time when the governments of the world said that we would eliminate child labor. That's as one of the violations of child rights. Actually, the concluding observations on the CRC committee of the report that the Lebanon government submitted last year, they actually said very much so that they had a concern about the persistence of child labor in country, Lebanon, particularly in the north, Bekaa, among the Palestinian and Syrian refugee children. So it's a very much high on the beamer and something that was reported by the government themselves. So this survey very much complements what was said. It complements a study that we launched last week with the Ministry of Agriculture and FAO on the other side, the farmer side of this question of child labor. Both these studies now provide a very good understanding to the government and everybody who's here and who sees this issue as a huge issue with information and data, and it will enable us to respond and guide our programming for addressing children working agriculture. So worldwide, it confirms that around 70% of all child laborers between 5 and 7 years of work, 70% of those are in this region. In Lebanon, despite the considerable progress that the governments have made in the form of legal frameworks, the issue still continues to be a major concern. Child laborers, especially those in the agriculture, existed prior, actually, in Lebanon. This is not a new phenomenon, but unfortunately, because of the crisis, this has increased, and it's become more visible, and it's become more serious. In 2016, UNICEF did a household survey. 6% of those who were involved in child labor are actually Lebanese. 6.7% at that time were Syrians, and 5% Palestinians. This translates to about 100,000 children involved in child labor in Lebanon. Although we do not have a clear census of the sector employing children, we know that many, if not the majority, of them work in the agricultural sector. Akkar, Hamal, Baalbek, areas where the agriculture is the most. This study, this specifically study, says that 64% of those children that were surveyed are actually working while they should be at school, between 6 and 14 years old. So, in addition to the learning deprivations, the working conditions and the hazards, as has been shown, are very, very alarming. The long working hours, the harsh weather conditions, the low pay, it's saddening, and the violence and abuse that also these children endure. Child labor deprives children of their rights to go to school, exposes them to violence, reinforces intergenerational poverty, and diminishes children's opportunities, perspectives, and hopes. Yes, this is a very serious violation of human rights, but not inevitable. Child labor is preventable, but it needs integrated approaches to deeply look at the causes and the vulnerabilities, reinforcing regulations, promoting public support for child rights, for example, strengthening and enforcing laws, and Honourable Minister, we were talking about child labor laws already earlier, so I hope we can move on that agenda forward. Mandatory schooling, I think some of the recommendations you actually very much said, mandatory schooling, child labor laws, in addition to working with the caregivers. I think this is a really important moment. When we enforce laws, we need to look at what's happening. Why are these children there? Because of the poverty issues. The families need to be helped. So the families need a hand up and not a handout. There needs to be a comprehensive approach on this. We've already seen actually quite a bit of work ongoing at the government level. I was just sitting yesterday with the governor of Beirut looking at street children and the work of children on the street. The municipal council came together. It was a round table. The municipal council came together. The municipal police, NGOs, SDCs, the Ministry of Social Affairs, sitting around the table, what can we do to move this agenda forward on streets children, and forming a task force. The same thing is the governor of Baalbek. He has had an exhibition on child labor already last year and had a big roundtable with all municipalities talking about child labor. How do we go about this issue from different perspectives? So I think at the local level, initiatives are being dealt with. It needs a national level response. And that's why you're here, Minister. I really much appreciate that. So as the AUB, as Dr. Naeem has already said, we are very committed to this agenda and look very much forward to working with you on this. Having said that, I really would like to thank AUB for this study, especially Dr. Habib for the labor of love, I would say, that you have put into this and your team, and you've shown that today again, how much of this is so much to your heart. So much appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming again, Your Excellency. And everybody that's here, we are very much looking forward to taking this to a concrete win-win solution and addressing the issue for the sake of every child. So thank you very much.
You can take the other one if you want. شكرا سيدة فيولا ممثلة اليونيسف على كلمتك الرائعة. حائز على درجة الدكتوراه في الاقتصاد الزراعي من جامعة ولاية ميشيغان، وماجستير في الاقتصاد الزراعي والأعمال من جامعة University of Guelph، وماجستير وبكالوريوس في إنتاج المحاصيل وحمايتها من الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. يتمتع بخبرة مهنية تزيد عن 30 عاماً مع العديد من المنظمات الدولية في مجال الأمن الغذائي والتنمية الزراعية والريفية، بالإضافة إلى خبرة ميدانية واسعة في معظم بلدان الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا بما في ذلك لبنان. بدأ مسيرته المهنية بصفته عالماً زائراً في المركز الدولي للبحوث الزراعية في المناطق الجافة إيكاردا في سوريا ومن ثم في تونس. تم تعيينه كبير مسؤولي البرامج في المكتب الإقليمي للمركز الدولي لبحوث التنمية IDRC كندا في مقر المركز الإقليمي في القاهرة. عمل لمدة 11 عاماً في المكتب الإقليمي للشرق الأدنى لمنظمة الأغذية والزراعة الفاو في القاهرة، حيث شغل منصب مسؤول السياسات الزراعية وكبير مسؤولي البرامج الميدانية. انضم إلى البنك الدولي في واشنطن ككبير الاقتصاديين الزراعيين في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا لمدة 5 سنوات. يعمل حالياً كممثل منظمة الأغذية والزراعة في لبنان. دكتور موريس سعادة، المنبر لك.
Sabah khair, good morning. If you allow me, I will be speaking in English. Excellency Minister of Labor, Mr. Kamil Abu Sulaiman, Excellencies, representatives of concerned Lebanese ministries and agencies, Dr. Fadl Khouri, AUB President, Dr. Iman Wahid, Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences at AUB, colleagues, representative of UNICEF and ILO, Ms. Nazha Shalita, head of the Child Labor Unit at the Ministry of Labor, distinguished guests and colleagues. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today to participate in launching this important study with our sister UN agencies, ILO and UNICEF. Allow me first to thank Dr. Hayat Asayran from ILO for her commitment and great cooperation, Mr. Carlos Bojorquez from UNICEF, who is not among us today, unfortunately, Ms. Jackie Atway, who is here with us from UNICEF, and my colleague from FAO, Faten Adada, who's also not with us today, for their great collaboration and support for the completion of this study and working very closely with AUB. As mentioned by previous speakers, this study is the first of its kind in Lebanon, and it was based on an extensive field work and a comprehensive survey covering more than 12,700 displaced Syrians living in informal tented settlements in the Bekaa. The study was conducted by the Faculty of Health Science team at AUB and coordinated by Dr. Rima Habib, and I would like to extend to them my sincere thanks and appreciation. Worldwide, the vast majority of child labor is found in the agriculture sector, more than 70% of all child labor worldwide. The latest global data showed that the situation of child labor in countries affected by crisis, like Lebanon, is becoming much worse. The future of a young generation is threatened. Working towards the elimination of child labor is crucial for FAO, which falls under our strategic objective of reducing rural poverty and food insecurity. Most child labor in agriculture is non-paid family work, and household poverty is the main cause of child labor. This is at the global level. Recently, FAO hosted the launching of the UN Decade of Family Farming, 2019-2028. Together with our partners, FAO can make agricultural livelihoods safer, more productive, and resilient, so that rural families and agriculture are not economically and functionally dependent on child labor. In Lebanon, FAO has embarked since 2015 to address aspects related to child labor in agriculture, acknowledging the vulnerability of Lebanese farmers and the lasting effects of the Syrian crisis on agriculture and food security in Lebanon. This study brings invaluable information and guidance on the hardship faced by children at work in agriculture in the Bekaa Valley, but also shows a broader picture of the vulnerabilities in the Lebanese rural areas and the agriculture sector. It gives us a broader picture on the food insecurity, deep multidimensional poverty, pushing children out of school and into work, and on the risks and hazardous working conditions faced by the displaced Syrians. I will not go over through the main findings because Dr. Habib has went through them already. But I take this opportunity to mention, as Violet mentioned, that FAO and UNICEF, in close collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, have also sponsored a complementary study focusing on the demand side of child labor in agriculture. In other words, looking at the issue of child labor from the perspective of farmers. The study, which was launched last week, was conducted by the Consultation and Research Institute, CRE, and covered all agriculture regions in Lebanon and both Syrian and Lebanese children working in agriculture. Together, these two studies will provide decision makers with a solid empirical basis to formulate policies and programs that could start tackling the very complex issue of child labor in agriculture. However, and in spite of its complexity, and Dr. Khouri mentioned that the solutions are very, very difficult to this problem, agricultural stakeholders can play an important role in addressing the issue of child labor in agriculture. For instance, agricultural extension agents have started to get sensitized to occupational safety and health issues related to children working in agriculture. While it's not in their mandate to enforce labor law, they could provide complementary services by providing advice to families on how to prevent the worst forms of child labor and creating awareness on health and safety in farm settings. Rural and farming communities can shift behavior and value education if they are given solutions and opportunities to sustainably secure their production and livelihoods. Social protection for rural women and children could be further developed. The agricultural sector could become a sector attracting more adult workers if the sector becomes more competitive and profitable. This would require greater public support to this sector, as well as more conducive macroeconomic and trade environments. Let me conclude by saying that FAO remains committed to supporting the Ministry of Agriculture in Lebanon and all other stakeholders to enhance sustainable and inclusive agricultural and rural development, with particular emphasis on supporting small farmers and other vulnerable groups such as women and youth. We are also committed to working with our partners, particularly with UNICEF and ILO, to address issues related to social protection of farmers, decent work, and child labor in agriculture. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتور موريس عادة على كلمتك الرائعة. منذ إنشاؤها كرست منظمة العمل الدولية جهودها للدفع قدما بقضايا العدالة الاجتماعية من خلال العمل اللائق والمنتج في ظروف تسودها الحرية والعدل والأمن والكرامة الإنسانية. مسؤولة عن معايير العمل الدولية والحفاظ على حقوق العمال، تحرص على إنجاح العلاقة بين المهنيين من خلال بناء منظومات قانونية تضمن حرية تكوين المنظمات وحرية الانتماء والمساواة في الفرص والمعاملة. الطبيعة الثلاثية لمنظمة العمل الدولية تجعل منها المنظمة الوحيدة التابعة للأمم المتحدة التي يقوم فيها ممثلو الحكومة والعمال وأصحاب العمل معا بتشكيل السياسات والبرامج التي تعنى بشكل رئيسي بقضايا العمل والعمال، ومن أهمها القضاء على أسوأ أشكال عمل الأطفال. فممثلتها اليوم تعمل كأخصائية في شؤون المساواة بين الجنسين وعدم التمييز في المكتب الإقليمي للدول العربية في منظمة العمل الدولية في بيروت. تتمتع بخبرة واسعة من خلال عملها مع حكومة باكستان ومنظمة العمل الدولية وبعض وكالات الأمم المتحدة في مجال تنمية المهارات وسبل العيش والتمكين الاقتصادي للمرأة والمساواة بين الجنسين. تعمل حالياً على مشاريع في لبنان والدول الإقليمية التابعة للمكتب الإقليمي في بيروت والمتعلقة بتمكين الاقتصاد للمرأة والمساواة بين الجنسين والحد من عمل الأطفال. السيدة فريدة خان، الكلمة لك فتفضل.
Thank you very much, Nessa. It's my pleasure to be here today and to share with all of you this space. In particular, His Excellency Mr. Kamil Abu Sulaiman, the Minister of Labour, the President of AUB, Dr. Fadl Khouri, our partners from UNICEF, IDRC and FAO, Hayat Oseiran, who from the ILO, who was closely involved with the study. She's not here in the room, but I know she's here with us in spirit. And Dr. Habib, thank you very much for your work and presentation of your findings. I've read the report over the last few days, and I must admit, with a sinking heart. In our work as development sector professionals, it's not uncommon to come across situations where it's sometimes hard to separate personal anguish from professional duty. But there is something uniquely deplorable about the idea of young children in hard labor. And the report, it comes out very strongly in the report. It describes young girls and boys, and I was surprised to see how many of them were girls. It describes them working hours and hours exposed to the sun, to the cold, to pesticides, to the threat of being beaten up. Some of them are actually hit. Very large numbers unable to go to school, and putting up with all of this just so they can take back to their families their wages, however meager they are, so that, with this hope that their siblings and their parents will have at least something to eat. Surely that's a burden too great for their small shoulders. It's precisely this what makes child labour such a violation of human rights, and why eliminating it is central to the ILO's work. 2 of the 8 core conventions, the core conventions are those which are considered the bedrock of any free and fair labour market. So 2 of those core conventions are on child labour. Convention 138 on minimum age and Convention 182 on worst forms of child labour. And I think it's important to realize that these conventions are not some esoteric ideals existing in some utopia. They are strongly rooted in ground realities. They're firmly grounded in the reality. And it's because of that these conventions recognize that in some cases it is fine for children to work, that there are certain conditions and certain types of work which could be considered suitable for children to do. But generally speaking, agriculture is not amongst them. Lebanese labor law recognizes work in agriculture as being hazardous for children, which means it's likely to impact their ability to go to school and is a danger to their health and life. And that's something which is confirmed by this research. Just as the impacts of child labor are many, psychological and physiological, the reasons behind them are just as numerous. Child labor is an immensely complex issue, and it can't be solved through single, simple solutions. It would be ideal to just enforce the prohibition on child labor and put them all in school. But the report shows that it's not that simple. Many schools simply don't have the capacity to take on more children, and the simple fact that these families depend on their children's wages, no matter how small, to survive, means that children's education might simply mean destitution. But keeping children in work reinforces the cycle of poverty and lack of opportunity. And unless we break this cycle, we are raising, as speakers earlier pointed out, we are the risk of raising a lost generation, a whole swathe of population who could be productive, active citizens of the future, but instead will grow up to be an uneducated, malnourished, thwarted, neglected, disenchanted part of us. No man is an island. The report makes some strong recommendations on how to break this cycle, including the stronger enforcement of laws, better workplace conditions, vocational training, and cash assistance. I want to add one more thing that might be worth exploring. The research team interviewed almost 2,000 households, and the entry point to these households, in 98% of these cases, was a senior woman in the family who was described as a homemaker. That suggests to me that in a majority of these families where children are working, their mothers are not. I would be interested in seeing, is it possible to work with these women, give them the skills and support and knowledge they need to enter the labor force, and would that have an impact on reducing child labor? Could investing in mothers be the answer? But that's a question for a new study and a new report. Now, some people can be cynical and say reports make no difference, they're read and they're forgotten. But I don't share that view. In 1842, the British Parliament published what's known as the Mines Report. For the first time, it shed light on the terrible state of coal mining in Britain. It brought to public knowledge how young children worked underground for 12 hours and 2 pennies a day, carrying coal far heavier than their own bodies. This report catalyzed a range of actions over the years. A bill was passed which prohibited all underground work for women and girls and for boys under a certain age. Subsequent legislation introduced the appointment of inspectors of coal mines. Miners were given the right to appoint inspectors from amongst themselves, which I think is a very interesting idea. Miners organized in trade unions went on to campaign for better working conditions and wages, and a whole range of safety measures and enforcement procedures were introduced until eventually their industry was modernized. All of this started with one report. And I'm hopeful that the report we launched today could do the same for children working in agriculture in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frida Khan, for your valuable speech. الدستور مرجعه، القانون حليفه، الثقافة والمعرفة سلاحه. خبرناه في الوزارة دون مواربة أو محاباة، عاملاً جاهداً لإرساء الحق وتحقيق العدالة الاجتماعية وتكافؤ الفرص وحماية اليد العاملة اللبنانية. مع تقدير مشرف حاز على إجازة في الحقوق وماجستير في القانون من جامعة القديس يوسف، وماجستير في القانون من جامعة هارفارد، وماجستير في الفنون من كلية فليتشر للقانون والدبلوماسية. هو عضو في نقابة المحامين في نيويورك ونقابة المحامين في بيروت. هو حالياً شريك أساسي في مكتب المحاماة العالمي لديكارت. يتولى فيه المناصب التالية: رئيس مكتب لندن، عضو في لجنة إدارة المكتب، رئيس قسم الأسواق الناشئة، رئيس قسم الأسواق المالية العالمية. إنجازاته عديدة. يعتبر أحد أبرز المحامين عالمياً في مجالي الأسواق الناشئة والأسواق المالية العالمية، وقد اطلع بدور أساسي في هندسة مجموعة من العمليات المالية في أسواق رأس المال العالمية، وهو المحامي الأساسي لكافة إصدارات اليورو بوند التي تقوم بها الدولة اللبنانية. اختير كأحد أفضل المحامين الابتكاريين في أوروبا من قبل الفاينانشال تايمز، ونال أول جائزة إنجاز لمدى الحياة من قبل The International Financial Law Review، كما سمي كمتمم للاتفاقات من قبل The American Lawyer، ومن مؤسسي جمعية لبنيز Executive Finance International Life، كما يقدم منح تعليمية للطلاب اللبنانيين عبر مؤسسة شاكر أبو سليمان. معالي الوزير كميل أبو سليمان، من هنا فإن المنبر منبرك والكلمة لك، تفضل.
شكرا. A few disclaimers and corrections. I no longer do any of this. I now work as a minister in the government of Lebanon. This is all in the past. I have resigned all of my positions. I'm very grateful that the Ministry of Labor asked for this study. Well, it wasn't me, it was my predecessor. It was Mrs. Shalita, so I get no credit. I will, however, use the study. I had some prepared remarks, but that was before I listened and watched. I think it's probably more useful for me, at least, to engage in, to give you a bit of a reaction to what I've heard. That was actually incredibly informative and moving. I should be in Parliament now, but I thought being here was much more interesting and much more informative for me, and that's what it turned out to be. So let's take things one by one. It is, as you know, the policy of the Lebanese government to arrange or assure a safe return for the refugees or the displaced as soon as possible. In the meantime, however, there is absolutely no excuse to have what's happening continue to happen. Absolutely no excuse to have children not go to school and work the way they're working. So anything we can do at the Ministry of Labor, and we will do things. We'll take obviously the study. With your permission, I will share it with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Social Affairs, whom I'm going to see tomorrow. I don't know if you've given them copies, but I think there is, despite what's being advertised, a reasonably good cooperation among various ministries, as Dr. Khoury said earlier. And I think we should try to work together to do something actionable and practical. And we count on you, and we count on the organizations that either worked on or funded the study to do that. So anything you can come up with in terms of practical steps, where you need my help, the help of the ministry, the help of the other ministries, we're here. We shouldn't leave it at that. We should actually do something with it as soon as possible. As far as I'm concerned, as you may know, we are trying to regulate the foreign workers market in Lebanon, especially as it affects the Syrian laborers, because they've been working, frankly, without permits, which is not an acceptable state of affairs. Among the things we're trying to regulate is the seasonal work, mainly in agriculture. I will take the study and make sure, at least for those who will apply to permits, no permits will be given to children, anybody underage, and we'll see what else we can do from your studies, what other lessons we can take, because that's extremely timely. It's happening as we speak. And I just want to thank you in general and look forward to working with you to implement what you've done. Thank you.
اختتاما بدي وجه كلمة شكر أولا لمعالي وزير العمل أستاذ كميل أبو سليمان وللرئيس الجامعة الدكتور فضل خوري لاحتضانه هذا الحفل والحضور جميع الممثلين المنظمات الدولية والجمعيات الأهلية والمؤسسات العسكرية. وبدنا ندعيكم على كوكتيل، حفل كوكتيل هو بالقاعة الخلفية لهذه القاعة. تفضلوا شاركونا.
يلا